Dr. Norm, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here all the way across the pond, as they say.
It is, yeah, it is. It's looking okay at the moment. I've been the weather's turning, so I've been getting out and moving a bit more, which is part of my prep for this podcast was the 12 modifiable factors for Alzheimer's and dementia. And before we get onto that, it's just easier to do when the weather's a little bit nicer here in England, right? I was thinking for a start of how to frame this conversation is you've spent years studying and understanding how to prevent decline. I'd love to understand how you came to have an interest in that topic.
Certainly. So, you want me to expand on and talk about how I became interested in the topic of dementia? Right.
Please, yes.
A little bit of history. Uh, as I've said in my bio, I've been deaf for a half a century, 50 years, and I when I was about 15 years old, I told my dad, I can't hear well in the classroom. I want you to get me a hearing aid so I can hear better. So I started understanding the research at that point when I was 15 years old. But after the years progressed, I finally got my first cochlear implant, which is the doohickey you see on both sides of my head here. These devices allowed me to hear again after being deaf with no hearing at all for 25 years. My hearing aids would no longer work. And then I got the cochlear implants in and I went, wow, this is incredible. So I got an invitation from my audiologist to attend a presentation she was doing. Her presentation was a summary of the Lancet Commission 2020 report on dementia and hearing loss. I went to that seminar. I went, oh, this is starting to make sense here. I don't have dementia, but I have a profound hearing loss. Why don't I have dementia? Because according to this report from the Lancet Commission, I had many of these modifiable risks controlled as after I got my implant. So I knew that a lot of other people did not know the connection between dementia and hearing loss. And here I've survived with a profound hearing loss. I don't have dementia, but I've also controlled the other lifestyle choices. So it was kind of an accident that I was already doing these things to prevent dementia. So that's the background.
Well, it's a wonderful, you're a wonderful example of your lovely line you have on your website where the quality of our life is our personal responsibility. And in the UK, at least, I feel people fall on a spectrum between having agency over their health and thinking health is determined and fixed. You seem to be very high on, you have a lot in your hands. It's malleable. It's up to you. Is that the result of your early upbringing and having to, as you said, ask your father for a hearing aid to go to school with? Or how did you come to that sort of malleable view on health?
Oh, let's see. I probably, that's an interesting question, how I became, I guess I call it a personal responsibility. I guess when I was a young boy, I wanted money from my parents for Christmas money. And they said, well, they were both either, they were just not, there's 4 kids in the family and they just didn't have a lot of money because they were both working hard. And they said, if you want money for Christmas, you got to do this thing yourself. So what me and my siblings did is we made pot holders. Those are things to hold hot cans. And we would buy yarn and put them in a loom and weave this yarn together and make these little 4x4-inch pot holders. We put them in a bag and go door to door and knock on the door and say, hey, would you like to buy a pot holder so we could have money for Christmas? And that's how we earned our money. And then later on, if I wanted something else, my dad says, well, you can sell all kinds of things door to door. So I looked on the back of the comic books, and there were things that I could sell, like they were all occasion cards. So I would order a box of these all occasion cards. My dad would give me the money. I'd order a box of all occasion cards, and I'd go door to door and sell these cards to make money for me. And then I sold magazine subscriptions door to door to make money for me. And so I developed that entrepreneurial spirit. If I want something, it's up to me. So I continued that mindset throughout my life.
Well, we're kindred spirits. I think there is something about the world is plastic that most entrepreneurs have, and your health is actually in your hands. 80% of how we age is down to us. Up to 45% of dementia cases seem to be preventable. But in this Lancet report in 2020, with the 12 modifiable risk factors of dementia, I think the term modifiable risk factors would be news to a lot of people in the UK. I'm not sure what it's like in America, but I think the consensus view is your fate is determined by your genes. Could you just speak to your view on when it comes to health and dementia and cognitive decline? How much is our fate determined by our genes?
I don't believe that our fate is determined by our genes. I know that genes may play a very small part, but that very small part can be overridden, not 100%, but by most behaviors that can override those genes. Like even in the dementia studies, there's a gene called APOE, I believe, and some people have this gene to get dementia, but they don't have dementia. That's just an example there, but a lot of people who do have genes that may predetermine their outcome. I don't believe that the gene is the deciding factor. I believe that we can modify our behaviors to overcome the genes. For most genes, now there's some genes that are just so dominant, there's nothing we can do about it. But for the most part, I believe that we do not have to subscribe that genes determine our fate.
Definitely. I mean, I'm in agreement there, and I think there's an element of you choosing your own destiny. It sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy almost. With regards to the Lancet paper, I'd love to just read out for the listener the 12 modifiable risk factors, and then I'd love to double click with you on treating hearing impairment. And I'd love to sort of just propose how that works and why hearing loss is a risk factor. So the 12 modifiable risk factors are, according to this 2020 Lancet study, 1, minimize diabetes, treat hypertension, prevent head injury, stop smoking, reduce air pollution, reduce midlife obesity, maintain frequent exercise, reduce occurrence of depression, avoid excessive alcohol, treat hearing impairment, maintain frequent social contact, attain a high level of education. So, Dr. Norm, treat hearing impairment. How does that work? How is that a modifiable risk factor of dementia?
First, let me say that there are no absolutes with this study. As you notice, it was 40% risk there, but no one can say that if you do this, you will prevent dementia. But the statistics are, with 9 peer-reviewed studies showing that if you do certain things, you can reduce the risk. So, getting to hearing, how does it work? I think you want to know what's the connection between hearing loss and dementia and how that works in the brain is what I think the question is. Okay, that's a question I get all the time. People don't get that connection. So what happens? First of all, we have the assumption. Many people have the assumption that we hear with our ears. We don't. We hear with our brains. The brain is always looking for external input from our 5 senses: touch, seeing, smell, hearing, taste, vision, all that. When the brain doesn't get those signals from the ears, then it starts to modify itself. It starts to look for other ways to respond to the environment. When that happens, the brain reorganizes itself and even shrinks to some degree, especially in the auditory cortex, because the auditory cortex, which is on both sides of the brain and the temporal part of the brain, receive information from the ears and interprets low, medium, and high sounds and interprets it into signal to the brain, respond by saying something or looking out way or changing something. And when that auditory cortex doesn't get those signals, it starts to shrink. It also starts to make the brain create more of a visual cortex so that if we don't hear it, we start to use our brain to look around. Well, what's happening out there? But what happens is the brain shrinks. It doesn't have the capacity to hear, and then it reorganizes itself, and then it starts to create a cognitive loss or cognitive change. That makes sense?
It does. It does. I think the more conversations we have on this podcast, and it's a lovely exploration around health, that use it or lose it principle comes up again. And if you don't have the capability to use that part of the brain, it will atrophy through disuse, and then that has knock-on effects to your social life, meaning you don't have less chance to even interact, and that can sort of perpetuate it forward. So how does a hearing implant am I right in saying a cochlear? Am I pronouncing that right?
A cochlear implant.
Cochlear, yeah, a cochlear implant. How does that help?
Well, we need to understand the mechanism of the cochlear implant. It is okay. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to take mine off and show it to you so you can understand the outside, and then I'll explain the inside. So the outside is this piece here. It's called, the one I dropped is called the headpiece, and this piece here has a microphone here, and then the middle part is a computer. Then there's a wire that runs from the computer up to the headpiece. Okay, so what happens here is the sound comes in as an analog sound. Wow, 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 into the microphone. It goes up to the computer. The computer digitizes it, takes it from analog to digital. It runs it up into the wire. The headpiece here sends an FM signal, radio signal across the scalp. Now, embedded in my head, in the scalp or in the skull, is a microprocessor. That microprocessor receives the FM signal, changes it back to a digital signal, and then there's a wire that runs behind my ear. Not this wire here, in the side here. It runs from the microprocessor underneath here, behind my ear, and the surgeon punches a hole in my mastoid process, and that wire goes into the cochlea. It's a curved type of thing. And there are little transmitters on each one of these. So there's about 12 transmitters on the wire inside my brain. And so that microprocessor embedded in my skull takes the FM signal, changes it to digital, runs it down the wire. The wire goes into my brain and it emits an electrical stimulation. And the cochlea receives that information, which it used to do before my ears were damaged. It sends it to the auditory cortex, and the brain interprets it as sound. That's a long explanation, but basically, I'm a bionic man. I'm hardwired with the cochlear implant to receive external information. The brain interprets it and gives me a clue how to respond.
It's amazing. How long have you had that?
I've had this one on the right side for 24 years and this one for 10 years.
Okay, so off the learning of the Lancet study, which says that if you have mild hearing impairment or moderate hearing impairment or severe hearing impairment, your degrees of risk increases in line with this degree of severity of hearing loss. Do you attribute the implant in a way that has helped you, and obviously you have no signs of dementia or Alzheimer's, things like this, which was wonderful. Is it as easy as you say, yes, 100%, this really helped my personal risk?
Yes, oh, absolutely. I've talked to my audiologist, my doctor. They said yes. Uh, this is certainly a significant factor to say that even though you are profoundly deaf, which I have 5 times the likelihood of developing dementia, I don't have it, and there's a high probability that this has kept me from developing cognitive decline.
Brilliant. Okay, well, that's wonderful, and I think that's such a powerful springboard for my next question, which is, if cognitive decline starts 10 to 15 to 20 years before it sets in, what message do you have for people? How can we use this information? Do we get a hearing check every year? What do you recommend?
So, how to reduce the risk, knowing that it takes 15 to 20 years before we're diagnosed with dementia. If you are diagnosed with dementia, depending on what stage you're at, it's pretty likely that there's not a whole lot you can do. And so, what I would recommend that people do now is they become aware of, if you have a high alcohol abuse, or if you are smoking, or if you have diabetes, or you have high blood pressure. If you take care of your body now, you'll substantially reduce the risk of developing cognitive decline. So I would recommend that people that are, like maybe 30 years old, get a baseline hearing test and then have it checked every year. And people who go in for annual physicals should get their hearing checked every year, but 13% of healthcare providers do not do any kind of a hearing assessment, which is a very simple whispering in the ear a couple of phrases, or you can get online and you can check your own hearing. But anyway, get a baseline, and then over time, if your hearing starts to diminish, then if you need hearing aids or a cochlear implant, get them. But most people, many people, are in denial about their hearing loss for up to 7 years. Oh, I don't need a hearing aid. Oh, I could do just fine. And they end up going, honey, speak up a little bit. Don't cover your mouth when you're talking to me. I can't hear you. Yeah, it's not a big deal. Well, what they're forgetting is, what they don't know is that the signals to the brain are being diminished and they're starting to develop cognitive decline already. So my advice is, yes, get your hearing checked. And if you need hearing apparatus, whether it's a cochlear implant or a hearing aid, get it and use it.
That's such an easy win. It's it's so easy to just have in your toolbox of things that you just go get a yearly hearing check. And if it doesn't look so good, great, there's things you can do. But as you said, that 7 years where people put it off, I imagine a lot of cognitive decline can escalate in a negative way during those 7 years. I mean, I can't remember the last time I had my hearing check, but as soon as we finish recording, I'm going to go and book one. Eloise, have you had a hearing check? Have interest? You have. It's definitely not a normal thing in the UK for, I guess, reasonably young people. So, but it should be. I mean, it's one of the 12 modifiable risk factors, and it seems like a very easy thing to do. What else in your personal toolbox have you used to ward off cognitive decline?
Well, to answer that question and to add on to your previous question, if you have had that hearing loss, you probably already start to have some cognitive decline. But the studies that from Hannah Glickman, I think I sent you that report. She's an audiologist and a neuroscientist. She has a triple PhD. She's done a number of studies on these, and it showed that if you already have a hearing loss, you probably have some sort of a decline in your cognition. But she showed that if you put the hearing aid on or the cochlear implant on, you can restore the structure and function of the auditory cortex. So you get a double whammy there. Number one, you get to hear better. And number two, you're more able to restore some of that loss of cognition. But by getting the hearing aid, then you start to be engaged more. You have reduced risk of depression. You have reduced risk of falling. You have reduced risk of mortality. So you can be very proactive in reducing the decline. If you have a hearing loss, you do something about it. And to answer your previous question a little bit further, if you stay engaged, keep the brain engaged. Like one of the things that I did accidentally that I didn't know about is that during those 25 years when I had no auditory input at all, I learned American Sign Language so I could go to school. That was a language. But after I got my cochlear implant, I started to learn how to play the ukulele. You have to, the strings, the beat, the song, and I'm in a ukulele group. And we perform for senior centers and assisted living centers around the Albuquerque area. So, and then of course, the other thing that people need to do is to be aware of what food you put in your body. So if you're eating high saturated foods and foods that are super prepared, um, and to increase the amount of high quality vegetables and fruits, grains, and those things. And then, of course, also add a high quality science-based nutritional supplement because we cannot get all the nutrients we need just from our foods alone. One of the modifiable risks is air pollution, if you notice on there.
Yes.
Air pollution causes amazing amount of brain changes and inflammation and things like that.
There was a study that came out in March of this year that from Oxford, and it is, I guess, an extension, a very similar field of study, and it found 161 risk factors of dementia, and in the top 3 was air pollution. And yeah, I mean, it's a very hard to control thing if you have to be in a certain place, right? But as you said, there's things we can do through your diet, through sweating as a sort of like if you think of like a daily detox. But yeah, it's very interesting research, and I think it's not obvious until you dive into the research a bit of how that can actually affect your cognitive decline. You mentioned diet, and you mentioned keeping your brain active, lifelong learning. I think it's important. We try to give people a why behind some of the prescriptions, or I guess protocols on this podcast. So lifelong learning and learning new things like your ukulele group is wonderful. What is the mechanism behind that keeps your brain young?
Yes, what keeps your brain young is really a little bit more science there. As we age, the brain, the nerve endings become clogged up with amyloid beta protein. Now, if that amyloid beta protein is not cleaned out, if it stays there between, let's say this is a nerve and this is a nerve endings, you get these proteins accumulated between here and here. Now, the way nerves talk to each other is through hormones. You get a hormone that goes from here to here, from the brain to the heart, say, for example. And as long as those connections and that gap there are healthy, there's communication between these two nerve endings. But if they get plugged up with amyloid beta proteins, then these nerve endings become inflamed. So what happens when, over time, if these become too damaged, then we get that cognitive decline. Now, the reason why you want to keep our brain engaged and our hearing aids on and eat the right kinds of food is it's a concept called neuroplasticity, where when we do things like reading or learning a language, we create more neural pathways. There are millions and millions of neural pathways. So these that have been damaged can be overridden in part by the new nerves that are created from learning language, for example, or being involved or engaged or whatever. So it creates new nerves, so the brain can have different ways to figure things out, putting it in the simplest terms.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think I was reading the other day that a proposed mechanism is there are higher levels of something called a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor in people without Alzheimer's who are sort of north of 70. And in people with Alzheimer's and dementia, there are low levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And although that's just an association, there's lots of things you can do to increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor, including learning new things, which I think is wonderful. And anecdotally, I think most people have an example of someone in their life who loves learning new things, loves reading, loves taking up new skills, like yourself, Dr. Norm, and actually is aging very, very well. And, you know, quote, sharp as a tack still, right? It's, I think intuitively people can understand that. So you have a lovely quote, Dr. Norm, on your website, which is all health starts in the mind. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Sure. We all think all the time. We hear this chatter in our mind, and the chatter can be negative or it can be positive. When we become aware that we do have control of our own reaction and our own ability to connect with the environment, then we can choose to, okay, let's see, I'm abusing alcohol. In my mind, I know I need to do something about that, so I'm not gonna abuse alcohol. Or I used to be a smoker, and I smoked for 25 years when I was young and stupid. And I had to make up my mind, okay, this is killing me, literally. I chose. And then also, there are a number of studies to show that if we have a positive outlook on life, if we do those things that we know feel good and make us feel better and engage with people, then that's just part of the mindset that we really control who we are and what we are by what we think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that resonates with me for sure. I mean, you know, whether you think you can or can't, you're probably right. And I think that applies to one's health quite a lot as well, for sure. With you mentioned inflammation. I'd love to hear sort of how the role of inflammation can affect, I guess, cognitive decline and what strategies you have to ward off inflammation.
Oh, great question. I love that one. If you notice, almost every one of these modifiable risks, let's see, for the exception of less education and hearing loss, um, and social interaction, all have to do with inflammation. Every one of them, every one of those, except for those four that I left out. As I mentioned to you earlier, the nerve endings come together, these get inflamed, or we call oxidative stress, because the amyloid beta that's there, that protein, it irritates the nerve endings, causing them to become inflamed. The food we eat or the food we don't eat, we have an internal inflammation going on in our body constantly. I mean, we all die of inflammation, except if we're hit by a truck or a train and we're traumatic, wiped out. But eventually our bodies start to deteriorate. The system shut down sooner or later because of inflammation. That's why we have to constantly become aware of the foods we eat and what we put into our bodies. Inflammation is the great. There's a great what we're looking for. It's the great denominator, I suppose. We have to constantly be aware of controlling and trying to stop the inflammation process. That's the best way to put that.
It's great, and I that all makes sense. How do we go and do that?
Okay, well, exercise, for example, is one really good way to stop inflammation. If we sit around and watch TV all the time, the body creates all these enzymes that start to create inflammation. If we eat good, healthy food, fruits and vegetables and grains, keep our gut healthy with good probiotics. The fiber keeps us cleaned out. All those help to reduce inflammation happening all over the body. High quality supplements, science-based, high quality, made in a very high level of manufacturing. Those are minerals, antioxidants, vitamins. Those also help to reduce inflammation. Let's see what else. Oh, controlling like diabetes or obesity, those are highly inflammatory processes, highly inflammatory. We must control our blood pressure. We must control diabetes, cut down on the sugar, not to eliminate it, but cut it down if we're aware that our glucose is too high. Smoking, that's the greatest inflammation device that humans have ever invented. Oh, there's one exception. If you walk into a nuclear power plant, you'll be inflamed a whole lot faster than smoking cigarettes. But cigarettes is the second most damaging thing we can do to our body. Inflammation, big time.
Definitely. And if you're a smoker, I think you should stop, says the research. But if you're not going to stop, you need to have a vastly higher omega-3 index than most people. Research does show that can mitigate a lot of the negative effects of smoking. Not saying you should smoke and just compensate with lots of fish oil, but if you are going to do it, you need to have a higher omega-3 index, which is concentrations in your body. Yeah, inflammation's a funny one. It's I think it gets touted around, and I think people think a green juice is going to do the most wonders. When I think actually a lot of the research is it pointed towards light, and specifically near infrared light from the sun, which I thought was an interesting one. How it can penetrate the skin, penetrate the cell to release melatonin in the blood, not the brain. And I was of the understanding that glutathione from something like NAC, which is a supplement, is the body's most potent antioxidant, but recently learned that melatonin in the cell is the highest antioxidant. And you get that through going out in the sun and spending time outside, which was, really interesting to hear. Okay, so keep levels of inflammation low. That's a good prescription. I think I can get my head around that one.
I can add one more thing about that information. When you get your annual physical, ask the doctor to do a blood test on C-reactive protein. It's a very common blood test that will measure the amount of inflammation if you have inflammation going on in your body. If the doctor sees that as high, then you need to start doing something about it. So it's a way to measure it as well.
Okay, C-reactive protein on the blood test. That's a good one. And I guess, would you say that would be the marker to track and follow? So say you get your C-reactive protein tested, go away and follow all these things we've been talking about, and then come back and get that looked out and hopefully it's lower? Or would there be other blood markers to track?
Oh yeah, there's I want to make sure that I'm saying that not one thing is going to be the answer, but for example, the A1C, hemoglobin A1C, that measures the amount of sugar that your body has had over a 30-day period or a 90-day period, one of the two. If you have too much sugar in your body, sugar is an inflammatory chemical, but it also triggers insulin. And when you get insulin in your body, that also is an inflammatory device. So getting your glucose checked, your A1C, your C-reactive protein, your lipids, your cholesterol, all that stuff together is a broad picture of your health. And if any of those are off too high, then you need to control those, because those combined are inflammatory markers, if you will, in a way.
Love that. Dr. Norm, am I right in saying you're 75?
76.
76. Okay, so I'm 28, which is, so you've got a few years on me. You're a lot, you know a lot more than I do. What would you say to 28-year-old, maybe soon to be Dr. Norm?
Well, that's a great question, because I got a 27 and a 28-year-old child, and I tell them you need to watch what you eat. You need to take your vitamins, your antioxidants. My son has both of my kids, and at that age level, they drive around in their cars with the volume all the way up, or they have the earbuds in and they crank it all the way up. And the highest cause of hearing loss right now, the highest population, is younger people. They go to concerts, they crank up the radios or the earbuds full blast. You can't do that because the ears are being damaged already. So take care of your health, get plenty of exercise, stay engaged, learn new skills, take your vitamins, don't smoke, don't abuse alcohol. That's what I would tell you, but you don't seem to be having any of those problems now, but
Well,
your thing.
well, you say that. I mean, I like to think I try and keep, or Eloise and I try and keep on top of our health. It's what we like to do for fun. It's a never-ending learning pursuit, and it's wonderful. Saying that, it's the things, the old Mark Twain thing. It's the things you don't see coming that get you. I'm butchering the quote, but the hearing loss one. I was in the gym this morning. I was blasting music through my ears, quite loud, and actually, I've never thought of that. Do you think the rise in AirPods and blasting music through your ears would correlate with the sort of rising Alzheimer's rates we see?
Absolutely.
Wow. Wow, that's really
Absolutely.
interesting.
It's an epidemic that's supposed to triple in the next 25 years.
Alzheimer's as a whole, right?
Alzheimer's, yeah,
Yeah.
Alzheimer's is a form of dementia.
Yes. Okay. I mean, if we were to hazard a guess as to why, I mean, looking at the preventable risk factor, I guess, air pollution. I mean, you could hazard a guess as to lots of rings, but what do you think? I mean, do you think it rising airports, rising pollution rates, a combination of things?
It's just a combination of things. We choose our lifestyle choices are just terrible. The standard American diet is sad. That is a big contributor. Um, one of the things you notice about the statistics are that women have higher incidence of dementia than men do, at least up until the last 10 or 20 years, because it used to be that at least American women were usually at home. They didn't keep their brains engaged. They would take care of the kids and they would take care of the husband, and they didn't have much education. They weren't mentally stimulated as modern women are nowadays, and so they were the likelihood of developing dementia, as well as the lower economic group. The lower education, the lower income you have, the higher risk you have of developing dementia. So there are many cultural factors that contribute to the dementia.
That's an interesting one with, the sort of the old and outdated societal construct of, male opportunity and females not getting access to the same kind of mental stimulation or same kind of opportunity, which is in turn mental stimulation. I was wondering, I mean, bar the cultural reasons, would there be any, or is there any mechanism that you know of? Is there hormonal reasons as to why females get dementia more than males, or is it purely cultural?
I don't have the data on. I don't have the data on that. I just know that the data did show that women have a higher tendency because, as I mentioned to you, they were not as active as the men were.
Mm.
They didn't get out, play golf, go to the gym, and do those things that guys did in the 50s and 60s and 80s and 90s.
Yes, yes. I'd love to see a follow-up of that. So, obviously it's not perfect, but it is definitely better from the 1950s, a more equal society. I'd love to see if that has normalized rates. But yeah, interesting to, maybe I'll have a look on PubMed and I'll follow up if I can find anything. Dr. Norm, it can't have been easy getting 3 degrees in your 20s with, whilst your hearing was degrading. As someone who's faced a lot of, I guess, challenges, what advice do you have for people who go through their own challenges and struggle?
Yes, it was difficult to go through college using sign language interpreters in all of my classrooms, because I did learn sign language as a second language when I was diagnosed finally with the hearing loss. I learned right about that same time the value of being committed to whatever you do. Be consistent and persistent. And for me, that was the greatest philosophy that I came up with that helped me get through. So if I made a commitment to, let's say, I had to take pre-meds to get into chiropractic college. What organic chemistry was like I don't know if you've ever had organic chemistry, but it is it hurts your mind to think about it. I was struggling so hard to get through that. But I made up my mind that no matter what it took, I was going to make that happen. I was going to make sure I got my chiropractic degree. I was going to make sure I made the commitment, and I was going to have to go over it, the blockage, the challenge to go over it or under it or around it or through it. But I realized that if I made the commitment, then all manner of things will come together to make it happen. To make it happen, and so that's the greatest advice I have for people is to get through obstacles is commit and don't give up, don't quit.
I love that. I love that. I think it's often the simplest advice, which is the best, right? Everyone says commit, but take a
Yeah,
simple idea and take it seriously.
sure.
Dr. Norm, I think there's so many other questions I could spend hours talking to you. One thing I just want to quickly jump back to was you mentioned supplements that you personally take, and you mentioned antioxidants and things. Is there anything in particular you do, I guess, talk with your clients and use with them?
Yes, I'm a manufacturer's rep for 3 different companies, and the reason why I recommend these companies is because their standard of manufacture is higher than the other ones that I've looked at. When I was in chiropractic college, we were assaulted. Sorry for that word. We were assaulted by all these companies that said, "Oh, this is the best vitamin mineral antioxidant out there," and I went, "Oh, come on, this is just a lot of hype." And so I started doing my own studies, my own research, and come to find out that many vitamin companies are manufactured at a very low quality, where you can get E. coli and salmonella in them, or what's on the label is not necessarily on the bottle. And so I did my research, and I recommend these 3 different companies, depending on what the patient or I'm no longer a doctor intern in office. My clients, I recommend based on what they are doing, what they're trying to acquire, what kind of lifestyle they want, what changes they want to make to their bodies. Then I'll make their recommendation based on that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think it's a good point to note. I mean, not all supplements are created equal, and there's so many things on the market that just completely shouldn't be there. And if you can look for third-party testing, and yeah, there's certain jurisdictions that are stricter to sell in, and those ones are usually the best to buy from as well. So I know in the EU is very strict to get a product to market. I know in the US it's a bit easier, or it's a lot easier. So obviously maybe there's more diligence needed where you are, and in the UK and EU as well. Dr. Norm, where can people follow along in your journey? Where can people keep up to date with you?
Oh, probably the best way is LinkedIn at Dr. Norm.
Okay.
It's Dr. Norm DC, but Norm Dawson DC. I forgot what I've got in that. I forgot what my handle is, but
Okay. Well, we can make sure we put it in the show notes, but where people can keep up to date with you. I mean, you're always posting interesting studies. You're always, I think you practice what you preach, which is you're a lifelong learner, and I think it's an inspiring message to keep going with it and keep your brain active. So, Dr. Norm, thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate the interview. And if there's anything else I can do to contribute to your success, you let me know.